Mature content. Viewer discretion is advised. Enjoy.
In ninth grade, in biology class, we had the usual dissection of fetal pigs, and I took the remains of that home and kept the skeleton.
Could you give us your current knowledge of Jeffrey Dahmer?
I used to know a lot more when I was in a forensic class my senior year. We did a whole project on serial killers. So at that point, I knew a lot more. I know he's a serial killer, but at this point, I don't know much more about him other than that.
How do you feel when you see or hear his name?
I guess a feeling of unnervousness. I mean, he's not currently living by me, but there still is a fear that someone like that could be in my community, and thinking about that name does make me reminisce about that.
All right, so the first question is, could you give us your current knowledge of Jeffrey Dahmer?
I have no current knowledge of Jeffrey Dahmer.
When you hear about what he has done, how does that make you feel?
Kind of scared.
Could you give us your current knowledge of Jeffrey Dahmer?
I know that he was a murderer.
And how do you feel when you see or hear his name?
I feel creeped out.
The first child of Joyce and Lionel Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21st, 1960, just before their first anniversary. His name was Jeffrey.
It was a very happy time when Jeff was first born, and for a couple of months it was like everything was brand new and very, very enjoyable and happy, looking forward to the future.
While Jeff's father pursued his chemistry degree, Jeff grew into a bright and loving child.
He was very exuberant. He liked to wrestle. He liked to run around and ham it up for the camera. And he liked to play with kids. He liked to get together with them. And he was very outgoing.
Jeff was also an extremely curious child.
He seemed to want to play with things and feel things and get to know their texture, and he seemed to be very much in tune with what's around him. He just wanted to know what was going on.
He had a fascination with animals as a youngster. Once, 4-year-old Jeff watched his father collect the bones of small animals that had died under the house.
I brought him out, put him in a metal pail just to collect them all in one place, and they dropped in with sort of a clanking noise, and Jeff seemed kind of interested in that noise, and he took a hold and let them drop down in too. You know, in retrospect, everything looks grim and dark and sinister. You know, like, could that be the start of something evil? Well, I have to admit, it's simply just the curiosity of a child.
Lionel finished his schooling with a PhD in chemistry. The family moved to Ohio, relocating 3 times before settling down on a nearly 2-acre wooded lot in the town of Bath, an hour's drive south of Cleveland.
Stephen Hicks, 1978, 19 years old. Dahmer got Hicks drunk, then hit him with a dumbbell and finally strangled him. After killing Stephen, he dismembered the body with a carving knife. He later pulverized the bones with a sledgehammer and scattered the remains around the property.
Stephen Suomi, 1987, age 24. Dahmer got the victim drunk, then smashed his head in and attempted to rip his heart out. He then took the body back to his grandmother's house and put it in the basement where he could continue to cut it up. After doing so, he put the remains in a plastic bag and threw it out with the garbage. No remains were ever found of Stephen Suomi's.
James Doxeter, 1988, 14 years old. The victim was drugged, then strangled. His flesh was removed from the bones with acid, and the bones were once again pulverized. He was disposed of the same as Stephen Hicks.
Richard Guerrero, 1988, 23 years old. After having oral sex with the victim, he gave Richard a drink laced with sleeping pills, then strangled him. Dahmer dismembered the corpse and disposed of the remains in the garbage.
Anthony Sears, 1989, 26 years old. Dahmer strangled him before dismembering the corpse. He cut off his head and genitals to keep as trophies. He then painted the skull gray.
Raymond Smith, 1990, 33 years old. Dahmer strangled the victim, then engaged in oral sex with the cadaver. He then dismembered the body and removed the head. The skull was then painted gray and placed in his fridge. The bones were left in a tank of acid until all the bones were defleshed. He then placed the bones around his apartment as ornaments.
Eddie Smith, 1990, 27 years old. He was enticed into Dahmer's lair, where he was drugged, strangled, then dismembered. The remains were placed in acid to dissolve.
Ernest Miller, 1990, 22 years old. Miller was lured into Dahmer's apartment by the temptation of earning $50 to pose nude for the camera. He was drugged, then his throat was cut. Dahmer removed the flesh with acid, bleached the skeleton, and kept it in his wardrobe. He also kept the victim's biceps and placed them in a freezer for later consumption.
David Thomas, 1990, 23 years old. Dahmer gave him a laced drink containing sleeping pills.
Curtis Straughter, 1991, 19 years old. He was drugged, then strangled. His cadaver was dismembered and the bones crushed. The skull was kept and the remains were dumped into the garbage.
Elroy Lindsay, 1991, 19 years old. Elroy was tempted into Dahmer's lair by being offered money to pose nude. He was then strangled. Dahmer had oral sex with the corpse before dismembering it. He kept the skull as a trophy.
Tony Hughes, 1991, 31 years old. Tony was deaf and mute, but was still tempted into Dahmer's apartment by written request, asking him to pose nude. Once inside, Dahmer drugged him and then strangled him. After killing him, he left the body lying around the apartment for a couple of days before the process of dismemberment was engaged. The corpse was left dissolving in acid. His skull was kept.
Conrad Synthesiphone, 1991, 14 years old. With Conrad, Dahmer shifted his methods. Dahmer drugged and drilled a hole into the frontal lobe of his cranium. He injected hydrochloric acid into the frontal lobe of the brain while Conrad was still alive. Such experiments were created to create a zombie in order to be in complete control of his victims. However, Conrad was later seen running naked and bleeding from Dahmer's apartment. Dahmer was interviewed by authorities, stating that Conrad was an adult drunk and his lover. Officer Joseph T. Garbrish and two other officers accepted Dahmer's explanation and released Conrad back into Dahmer's custody. Conrad was later strangled. The body was dismembered and stored into acid.
Matt Turner, 1991, 20 years old. As with most other victims, he was lured into Dahmer's chambers where he was drugged and strangled. The body was dismembered and left lying around his apartment.
Jeremiah Weinberger, 1991, 23 years old. Similar to Conrad, except he had boiling water injected into his head and left alive in a zombie state for 2 days. He was later strangled. The cadaver was dismembered and again stored in acid.
Oliver Lacey, 1991, 23 years old. As with most of the victims, he was drugged and strangled. During dismemberment, Dahmer would sodomize the corpse before being stored. His heart was kept in the fridge.
Joseph Braidhoff, 1991, 25 years old. Joseph was lured into the apartment by being offered money to pose nude. He was then drugged and strangled. The corpse was again dismembered, but not completely. The head and torso were kept in his apartment.
I was drinking a lot during that time and just, I don't know, looking for something to, some way to find some fulfillment, some pleasure. And I acted on my fantasies, and that's where everything went wrong.
Did you ever tell yourself, I have to stop this? I must stop doing this?
Yes.
When it was going on?
After the second time, it seemed like the compulsion to do it was too strong, and I didn't even try to stop it after that. But before the second time, things had been building up gradually, going to bookstores, going to the bars, the gay bars, bath clubs. When that wasn't enough, buying sleeping pills and using it on various guys in the bath clubs. It just escalated slowly but surely. And after the second time, which was not planned, it was out of control. It felt like it was out of control.
Were you relieved to be arrested?
Part of me was, and part of me wasn't. I don't know. It's like I don't believe I have a split personality, but you know the feeling where you're sort of glad about something, but on the other hand you're not. That's how it was. It was a relief not to have to keep such a gigantic secret that I had kept for so many years. And once I saw that I had no choice but to face it, I decided to face it head on and make a full confession. Angry with other people who think that they have a right to somehow try to blame my parents for what happened. That's not right at all. No one has the right to do that because they're totally innocent. They had no knowledge of it. And that angers me. There comes a point where a person has to be accountable for what he's done. The only motive that there ever was to completely control a person that I found physically attractive, and keep them with me as long as possible, even if it meant just keeping a part of them.
Dahmer was arrested after victim Tracy Edwards escaped from Dahmer. Edwards flagged down a police car and sent them to Dahmer's apartment. Pictures of dead bodies and dismembered limbs allowed the police to arrest Dahmer. After further investigation of the apartment, the authorities found multiple photos of victims, several dismembered limbs, severed heads, organs such as a human heart. After a 2-week trial, the court declared Dahmer sane and guilty on 15 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 15 life terms.
While serving time in prison, Dahmer and inmate Jesse Anderson were attacked by inmate Christopher Scarver. Dahmer later died due to severe head trauma on November 28, 1994. He was 34 years old.